Hey everyone, you clicked on the right button. You're back with me, Mitchell Hora. I'm a farmer from Iowa, joined by a special guest today.
And I'm Zach Johnson. Special is correct, Mitchell. I farm in Minnesota, and this is Fieldwork, a podcast by farmers for farmers.
We want to give a big thank you to the Walton Family Foundation for supporting us this season financially. And ironically, Zach, we're going to talk about ag finances here today, because I guess that's an important thing when you're running a business. Got to be able to have a little bit of money to flow around.
I would say that's probably an important thing if you want to be in business next year and the year after.
Well, we're going to talk with a couple key guests here today that are getting creative with how ag financing really works, but especially the financing around sustainable agriculture. You know, it's a little bit different than just going into your bank to say, hey, I need to buy seed and chemical and equipment. But talking with them about sustainable ag can be a little bit of a different conversation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what they have to say about incentives when it comes to transferring to regenerative farming, or what some of their farmers are doing right now when it comes to things like that, and what kind of options are out there as far as incentives. Also, some of the bureaucracy that goes along kind of behind the scenes and what they have to say about that, what might be coming down the pipeline.
Well, let's talk with a couple key guests here. First, we're going to have Sami Teletin. She went to Stanford Graduate School of Business, which sounds super fancy. And she wanted to become an entrepreneur. And that's where she met her business partner, who's from a farming background. And last year, they started a startup called FarmRaise.
All right, so tell us, what is FarmRaise and what do you do?
FarmRaise is a one-stop shop for farm funding. It's the easiest way for farmers to get grants and loans. And what we do is we simplify the process of figuring out what the heck you're eligible for in terms of grants and loans. And we make it really easy for you to manage your deadlines and apply to programs on time. Our goal is to unlock funding for producers to make sure that you can actually invest in your farm and spend more time working on the farm, making a livelihood that supports you and your family.
So FarmRaise helps the farmers figure out exactly what they can apply for and how to do it. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. We run eligibility across a number of factors and then match farmers with grants and loans that meet their goals and also their eligibility specs as a producer. So where the producer is located, how much income they're producing, and then a couple unique eligibility requirements to specific programs.
You know, something that strikes me here, you know, is, okay, there's plenty of these different programs that are out there for farmers, lots of different conservation initiatives. We'll see what's going to happen here in the Biden administration. There's supposed to be some changes to some of these initiatives, but one of the biggest pains is going through all the paperwork and stuff. And like, Sami, is that kind of what you guys are looking at helping with, is not have to do so much paperwork?
Yes, exactly. Paperwork is the biggest headache. And I can speak to this from experience because it's been several months of operation at FarmRaise. We started in March of 2020. And we started by tackling the application to EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, two excellent programs from the Natural Resource Conservation Service that most farmers are eligible for and should apply for, that also support soil health. But to get to those programs, especially if you're not familiar with them, you have to navigate a couple gnarly forms, one around highly erodible lands and wetland, an income certification form, and then the application to the program itself. And we've interviewed hundreds of farmers before we built FarmRaise, and so many of them told us how much of a headache it is to navigate the paperwork. And as amazing as they are, USDA Service Center representatives don't always have the time to patiently sit and work through some of that paperwork with you. And so you end up having to rely on extension offices or yourself or Google to get through this. And so we've combined all the paperwork for these programs into one application module you can go through online, simple, and submit, and then we file it all for you.
Yeah, Zach and I are millennials, and we don't want this to be more challenging than, easiest way forward is definitely the best. So, how do we actually proceed? So, as farmers who are interested in going about, applying for some of these programs and working with FarmRaise, how does that work? What's the actual onboarding and step-by-step process?
Great question, Mitchell. So we have two tiers of service. The first one is a premium tier. To get involved with premium, you just go to our website, farmraise.com, you click sign up, and you select what you want to pay. So this is, every time I tell a farmer about this, they ask why we chose to do it this way. We have a pay what you want model. So you can choose to pay $10, $20, or $30 a month to opt into premium. That helps you gain access to unlimited office hours with our staff, your own personal advisor at FarmRaise, and we will match you to all funding programs you're eligible for, state, local level programs, federal programs, and we'll even provide loan support for you. We then manage all the deadlines for you and all the paperwork so that you're getting your paperwork in the door on time. And we charge a success fee on grants and loans that we unlock for you. And then if you want us to write a narrative-based grant for you, so this is a grant that requires pages of writing, we will also charge an hourly grant writing fee. We chose to do a pay what you want at the base level of paying into the membership because we wanted this service to be accessible to farmers at any stage. We didn't want to keep anyone from using the service by putting out a payment model that was restrictive. And so we chose pay what you want to make this more accessible. There's also a free tier. So if you aren't quite ready for premium, you kind of just want to explore some initial options, you can set up a free account within our digital platform, and we will match you with federal grant and loan programs that you're eligible for after you take a 2-minute quiz to give us some basic info. And then you can actually go into the app and apply for EQIP, which we've talked about, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, through our streamlined application tool.
So who do you find is coming to you for help with this? Who's your most common customer? What does that look like?
We've seen our average farmer is on the small to medium size, and they're coming from Virginia, Iowa, and Minnesota. They're top 3 states where producers are coming to us from. But we've actually had most states represented in our early user base. We kind of have 3 tranches of customers too. So those that are brand new to farming, they have an idea and they need the capital to get started. They're probably about a quarter of our base. And we've actually seen in that tranche a lot of folks interested in container agriculture. So like vertical farming or hydroponics that want to get started on a relatively small scale and in an urban area. So that's been interesting to see come in. And it makes sense. They have to put out a lot for the infrastructure for container farms. So they're looking for help navigating that funding. We have another tranche, and this is our biggest one. That's probably half of our base. And this is a group of farmers that are within their first few years of operating. So they're somewhat established, but they're at a transition point and they really need to expand in some way, diversify production or expand the size of the farm. And they're looking for advice on the best way to access funding to do that. And then there's a last tranche of folks that are established farmers that are looking to innovate on the farm or to be in a position in a couple years to make some significant capital investments. The classic example of this is a soil health oriented row crop grower in the Midwest that wants to try cover cropping and is also wanting to be in a position to buy more land in a year or two and wants help gearing up for that.
So Sami, what's the goal here? What's the vision of FarmRaise overall, and what's your goal as you are, you're still pretty early in this and having some good initial success, but what's it look like as you guys continue to scale?
Our vision for the company is vital farming communities. And so we set out on this quest a year and some change ago to help farmers unlock funding and address the acute need of liquidity. so getting capital in the door today. And what we've found is there's just larger challenge of profitability. This interest that the farmers we've talked with have in being on the farm full time and not having to worry about an off-farm job. And this desire by farmers to be able to jump at opportunities to improve their business, whether that's buying new land or taking on a new innovation. And so as we think about what vital farming communities really are, they are profitable. They're able to be economically viable. They're also ecologically resilient, and they're equitable. So that's how we're orienting ourselves. It's a vision that is near and dear to our hearts and is something that we constantly use to inform the direction we go.
Sounds like quite the vision. Zach and my vision is just to have the, top podcast and have a helicopter. I mean, keep it simple.
That's
Would
right.
you use your helicopter for aerial seating, Mitch?
No. Going to the beach only. No
Nice.
aerial seating. Well, if we need maybe we can get a loan through Sami for that, beach. Sami, how do you guys handle loan applications for beach? It's not even beachfront property. It's just the whole beach. We just want the whole beach.
The
How does
island
that work?
and the mineral rights. We want to maintain those.
Well, definitely need the mineral rights.
We've never been approached for a project like this before. I'm going to have to really talk with the team and get back to you on funding options. We might actually have to go to some wealthy investors to fund this endeavor.
We've already got it trademarked, Beach Raise. I already got it trademarked, so you're gonna have to go through me on that one. But I'll license the idea to you if you want to.
That's so generous of you.
Zach and I.
Yeah, I'm thinking though we're gonna have to grow some sort of crop on this beach.
Well, I mean, Zach, you were just at the beach. What kind of crops were they growing out there?
Coconuts.
Well, I suppose. I don't know how lucrative that is.
Oh, that doesn't
never
have to
ran
be
the ROI.
lucrative, Mitchell. It's farming.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true. And it's farming on the beach. We already got the beach and a helicopter. And when we need, we can just leave.
Oprah owns a farm in Hawaii. Maybe you could ask her.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll give her a call
We
next.
can call her. Yeah.
I'll put that on my list here. Call Oprah. Okay, got it. I got it.
You didn't just text her. I guess you just DM on Instagram, don't you, Zach?
Yeah, well, Oprah is so slow at texting back that I find it better to call her.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Sami, are there any funds out there that you guys know about that you find to be like a secret stash that you can tell us about here? Open that floodgate here and let everybody listening know where's the secret stash that farmers need to know about.
Yes. Well, I wish that there was some arbitrage here that, there's the secret gold mine for farmers that I could share and open up the floodgates. But in the absence of that for now, I'll share with you some of the funds that are emerging that we're really excited about. So there's a fund called rePlant Capital. It's a new fund that's structured as a debt fund for farmers. They are looking to help farmers get loans if soil health practices and regenerative agriculture practices are being implemented on the farm. And the reason why this is so cool and novel is that today it's actually pretty difficult to access traditional agricultural debt capital to finance soil health endeavors. So you can't really get a cover crop loan from your lender today. It's difficult for those lenders to underwrite that. So rePlant is one that really excites us because they're doing something new. They're paving a way towards the future. There's also a couple funds that we are looking at and directing farmers to that use non-traditional forms of investment. So there's a firm called Steward, which helps farmers source operating capital up to, I think, $150,000 to invest in the farm and to get things going. they are using more of a crowdfunding model to do that. So it's structured as a loan, but it's coming from a variety of individuals rather than from an institution. And then there's also a fund called Harvest Returns that some of the farmers we've worked with have also worked with, that is using equity investment to fund different aspects of a farmer's operation. And so those are things we're looking at. One of the really fun things about working at FarmRaise is that we have prospective funders coming to us to ask for our help through workshops and things like that in designing the best funding mechanisms for farmers. And that's our opportunity to really be the voice of our farmers and advocate for what they need and help that fund develop the best mechanism to really meet that need in the field. So I love when we get the chance to do that, and I'm excited to see that coming more so in the future as well.
Yeah, so Sami, we neglected to tell you earlier that we're talking with Robyn here yet this evening from rePlant Capital.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we're going to dig directly into that. And this is just kind of a side note here, as we're recording this. But Zach, what do you think in terms of, just the awareness of farmers not even really knowing that there's options out there that they could utilize and find some creative ways to get more funding coming to the operation?
Yeah, I mean, we've had shows on it, in the past last season, and we've talked about that where it is difficult. There are options out there. And I think finding what is right for your operation and what your goals are and what you're trying to do is really the difficult part. And then deciding if it's worth, mudding through the waters, so to speak, and trying to figure out if it's worth it or not. Because by the time you mud through those waters, sometimes you may spend a lot of time on it and find out that it really wasn't worth your time. So this FarmRaise idea really interests me here. How do you know, Sami, how do you know if somebody should apply for a grant or a loan and what type it is? I assume there must be some sort of a filtering process to figure it all out.
Yes, that's a great question. That's actually how we've designed our eligibility quiz. So this is a 2-minute quiz you can take. You get asked about 13 questions about your operation today and about your goals. And using that information, we can then match you to these different grant and loan programs. And Zach, what it really comes down to is where are you at today on the farm? Are you at a place where you have some existing infrastructure to work with, some existing capital that you've invested, or are you kind of earlier than that? So that's a dividing place. And then the second area is, what are you looking to fund? So are you looking for an ownership or loan or like a mortgage opportunity? Are you looking for anything related to infrastructure or capital improvements? So buying equipment, investing in the land. Are you looking for operating coverage, or are you trying to innovate? Are you trying to do something completely new, something related to soil health or diversifying your product through a value-added endeavor? And from there, we can understand, okay, this person is a good fit for grants, or this person is a good fit for loans. And generally, I think where we see the most success for grants is when someone is looking to try something new that adds value to the operation or is related to the environment or conservation. There are grants for soil health practices, for renewable energy production, and for value-added production or getting to a new market. But there are less grants available for infrastructural investment or even for purchasing equipment. And a lot of grant programs actually will have a restriction on the amount of equipment you can actually buy.
So, Sami, let's talk on the political side of what's to come here in 2021 and the next couple of years. That the Biden administration has, said, I saw an article, I think even just this morning, about that they're going to be utilizing more, more focus on CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, but also on CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program that you have talked about. Give us the insider scoop. What's going to happen on the political components here and some of that government funding and their focus specifically around these programs?
Yeah, this is an exciting time for agriculture, for grants, for cost share programs. And the reason is that the new administration is prioritizing climate change as one of their key areas. And they see agriculture and nature-based solutions as part of the winning ticket here in order to get that priority pushed forward. So they're looking into ways to utilize existing programs, like you mentioned, Mitchell, the CRP and CSP programs, to help incentivize the adoption of climate smart agriculture practices. There's also been talk, and in the Climate 21 transition memo, it was highlighted, there's been talk of starting a carbon bank through the Commodity Credit Corporation that would actually finance land management practices that sequester carbon, creating maybe a boon to a lot of these carbon markets that are cropping up for farmers to access, where you're guaranteeing a buyer kind of at the end of it with this carbon bank. That's something I'm watching and I'm interested to hear more about. I'd be really curious to hear your all's thoughts on that as you think about that. And then the last thing I'll say is just to expect investments from USDA in the programs that support rural green energy and smart grid development as well. So looking at rural development offices and seeing how they invest in the REAP program, Renewable Energy for America program, and then any other advancements with clean energy in rural areas.
Yeah, and Sami, to your point on whether it be the Carbon Board or the Growing Climate Solutions Act or some of these other things that are being pushed through DC at the recording of this, to me, what I think is going to be interesting is, there's a lot of focus from like the CSP side on the government and taxpayer funded programs. And then on the carbon side of things, where it's, for the most part, it's going to be private industry funded. Now there is some political drivers and different countries, especially different countries, and then like in California and stuff, they do have direct tax driven programs around carbon credits. But my concerns are, I see some of these as saying you either do, a CSP or EQIP or a cost share funding, or you do a carbon funding. And to me, I think there's a lot of opportunity for both of them to play together. But what have you seen from that standpoint, and what are your reactions, I guess, to my thoughts around how those programs are going to overlap and be able to play nice together?
I couldn't agree more with you that they can definitely play nice together. And we anticipate that that's the way it's going to go. We've been looking into this and trying to take a pulse on it. And what we're seeing is that there's really no reason that stacking like an EQIP grant that gets you an EQIP cost share agreement that gets you access to financing to help you plant cover crops. There's no reason that couldn't be used in conjunction with you then selling the carbon to a buyer. And the reason is that the USDA is not buying the carbon credits by giving you EQIP financial assistance to implement the practice. And so we see those as being really value additive. It's a great question that you ask, and it's one that we should definitely keep watch for, but we don't anticipate there being a significant challenge with that moving forward. I think the question now is, Mitchell and Zach, what have you both seen in terms of uptake or access of farmers in your areas to these programs we've been talking about?
Yeah. So like in my area, I'm in a hotbed for soil health and for these practices as we've talked about a lot on here. And there's actually quite a few of the farmers that I work with here in Washington County that are in different CSP contracts. I don't know that there would be, there's nowhere close to a, significant number, getting close to majorities or nothing like that. But it's fairly common that these farmers are enrolled in some of these CSP contracts. Now, the thing with the CSP contract too is it's typically like a 5-year commitment. And Sami, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a multi-year type deal. There's multiple different things that you're agreeing to, so it's kind of a stacked program. There's been multiple farmers that have taken advantage of it here in this area. And And it's a little different than like our normal local Iowa cost share program for cover crop. It's a, so farmers are able to really stack, I think, the local state programs, the local watershed programs, and the federal programs.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, Iowa is a pretty awesome state for funding for like soil health things, for example, because you have a revolving loan fund at the state level. So if you want to participate in the state level cost share or say like EQIP or CSP, you can, but you don't have the capital to pay some of the costs up front to later get reimbursed. You can apply in tandem to the revolving loan fund at the state level, which is about $10 million total available, and get that upfront cash that you can then use your cost share dollars to help repay down the line. I've not seen infrastructure like that in any other state yet, so it's really exciting.
Why do you think?
Zach, I was just awesome.
Well, we all have our own opinions, Mitchell. We won't get into that. Sami, why do you think you had mentioned what Iowa has going on, and they were one of the top 3 that you listed earlier? But so adding on to that, why do you think Virginia and Minnesota would be states that are also in those top 3 there?
It's a great question that we are investigating because we don't fully know the answer. What I can say is that we've been reaching farmers through Facebook and also through reaching out to local extension offices and local, farmer organizations to get the word out. And maybe by using those channels, we've naturally, kind of sourced from those states. Jace is from Virginia, so I wonder if some of our outreach efforts there have been more strong because she's from Virginia. On my part, I love Iowa and Minnesota. I've lived in Minneapolis for a few months and definitely think that they're prime regions to get involved with farmers in terms of FarmRaise. And so those are definitely areas we've talked about doubling down on in the future. In terms of other things to share, Mitchell, this is sort of a detour, but I just wanted to say that on CSP, my understanding is that it's the next step from EQIP to where you can, if you have existing conservation practices like cover crops or no-till implemented, you can get CSP funding to either maintain or improve those practices. And so I would actually think that you're a great candidate for that program. I know that there are restrictions around the way you implement some of those practices, and that might be something that isn't right for you, but I would maybe suggest revisiting that in the future, because I do think that you're a great candidate for it, given all the work that you're doing on the farm.
I think FarmRaise should help me to revisit it.
I was going to say,
I would love that.
Can Mitchell log in on the free tier side of things and take that 13-question eligibility quiz?
He can. Yes, indeed. And he can go in and apply for CSP after that.
There you go, Mitchell.
Zach, you probably already did it during this interview since you're an overachiever.
I have the window open, but I didn't want the keys to make the clickety-clack sound because I was afraid Annie would chew me out.
Sami, that was great.
Yep. Thank you, Sami.
Well, thank you all so much.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and really, rooting for FarmRaise and their ability to help farmers and help to overcome some of the burden of doing paperwork and be able to access new areas of financing that maybe a farmer didn't have access to before.
If you want to learn more about FarmRaise, which is all one word, by the way, just Google it or go to farmraise.org. We'll be right back with our next guest after a short break.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We want to introduce you now to Robyn O'Brien. She is a co-founder of another startup called rePlant Capital. Her background is working with some of the big food companies in the country.
rePlant is a venture capital fund that wants to help finance a transition from conventional agriculture to regenerative and organic. Robyn is going to tell us more about that, but just so you know, you might hear her 4 kids coming and going in the background.
Not that you would know anything about having kids running around the house while we're recording fieldwork, though, would you, Zach?
Oh, absolutely not. It's always very simple to get them to, sit down quietly in another room and really just tend to themselves.
Well, that's good. Okay, now let's listen in to our interview with Robyn O'Brien. No, Robyn, we were just talking with Sami from FarmRaise.
I love her. I love her.
Sami is the best.
Yeah,
so we were just talking with her.
They're an amazing team. And I asked Sami, I was like, who is like you, that is also out there circulating? And thankfully, I know you guys are the same. I mean, the talent and the interest that's coming into this industry is absolutely incredible. I think that's what makes it so much fun. It's like such a massive heavy lift of getting this thing going, but because of the people in it, it's so much fun.
Yeah, Zach and I were looking at all these different ways that we can contribute, to sustainable agriculture and all these, big dreams. And we went for podcasting because we want a helicopter. So that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Much, much larger goals like helicopters and private beaches.
Yeah.
The things that, matter to the world.
Yeah.
But you know what? Imagine if farmers had the helicopter and the private beach. Everybody would be like, I want to be a farmer, And I think that's actually the opportunity is to elevate the career and, compensate it. I think should probably be our podcast, really to put it forward for the important work that it represents and the stewardship that it represents for a society, and to compensate accordingly. I gave a keynote in New Zealand a year and a half ago, and the farmers there were treated like CEOs of multinational operations. They were elevated and they were held up, and it was remarkable to see. And it just made me so sad because we've taken the exact opposite approach here. And that's the opportunity is to just completely flip the script.
I totally agree. And I've said that before, but how do we approach it? How do we change that narrative that, I think a lot of people look at that farmer as, old McDonald farmer out there, but really they are that CEO. How do we change that narrative?
I think it starts with an economic equation. And so, right now, as you guys know, the economic equation for farmers isn't working. The financial resiliency isn't there. And we have, record debt levels. On top of that, there's suicides, there's an opioid epidemic. I mean, it's an industry in crisis. And so when you look at that, most crises are related to the economics of an industry. So let's start there. It's not something that we're going to be able to do overnight because it has taken us decades and generations to build this model that is so extractive and so degenerative. So to try to flip that overnight is not a realistic task. I would hope that within a generation, or by the time I'm a grandmother, that we can now look back and say, this is what we were able to do. We were able to reposition the career of farmer in our society to the level of recognition that it so rightfully deserves. It's for the stewardship of the soil. It's for the governance of these assets like soil and air and water. And the fact that none of us can go a single day without any of those things. And so to really kind of flip the script, we aren't attracting enough young people into farming. And it's because, it's not a strong economic argument. If you want to start a family and have kids and send them to college, you're looking at a career and saying, is this going to afford me that opportunity? So how do we make farming that career?
I love the way you put that and the way you talk about the industry as a whole and what we're looking at towards the future here. And there's a lot to dig into when it comes to, where we are right now, how we got here and where we go. But let's talk first about your new company, rePlant Capital, and what you guys are doing to work towards some of that.
I will often say you cannot fix a broken food system or a broken farming system with a broken financial system. The reason we have such extractive systems in place in food and farming is because we have really extractive financial systems. Thankfully for the 3 co-founders, Dave Haynes and Don Schaefer and myself, we really landed on there is no food security unless there's financial security and financial resiliency for our farmers.
So what specifically, though, is rePlant going to do in that? Like, how do you guys, or what's your role going to be, I guess, in ensuring that financial resiliency for that farmer?
What would it look like if capital came in with a regenerative mindset instead of an extractive one? And that was really where we started. And so then we said, what does it look like if capital is regenerative? And so if we were to work with farmers who are interested in transitioning their farmland, to think about the capital, instead of tying it to these metrics at these banks, to tie it to things like soil health. So let's tie the cost of capital to soil organic matter or nutrient density or water infiltration or water conservation. And the stronger those metrics are on farm, the lower the cost of capital. What I love about that is that the farmer who is farming regeneratively is being compensated for this work that he's already doing, but it's work beyond what he sells that crop for. It's for the stewardship, it's for the service, this greater service to compensate, through these cost savings. And what we've seen is that farmers that transition that farmland to regenerative, as they transition, they're moving away from that chemical input model. And as they move away from the chemical input model, that means they're also moving away from the debt levels that are required to finance the chemicals. And so that chemical treadmill that a lot of the farmers are on is accompanied by the very parallel debt treadmill. And it's like two, parts of that railway track, taking them straight into that mess. So again, it's stepping away from this one size fits all mindset of ag and one size fits all mindset of financing and saying, let's regionalize this. So you have the lower cost of capital, then you have the technical assistance provider. And then importantly, we bring in these multinational food companies as a guaranteed buyer. And that's born out of years of work that I have been doing, with these companies. The relationships it's been fascinating the last 15 years to see how that has changed for them to have gone from a very defensive position of we're not changing anything, don't tell us what to do, to an understanding that the 21st century consumer is looking for products that are free from certain things. As a result, these multinational food companies are saying, what? We don't have the supply chain to actually meet the needs of the 21st century consumer. Rather than transition American farmers and support them in this transition and move them into this financial opportunity with the organic premium and everything else, the food companies initially just said, we're going to import it. And, that was crushing to me because I thought, we are importing this opportunity that should be afforded to American growers.
So, Robyn, there was about 4 podcasts worth of stuff there that we're going to have to dig into.
Sorry.
I would agree. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was trying to figure out which path to go down.
Well, but I'm going to start way back from continuing to baby step here because I think the initial piece here is the root of this. And my observation in ag is that a lot of the core problem here is that ag today is driven by bushels and debt, meaning I got to continue to make cash flow to continue to pay down that operating loan, and because it's all debt driven, and the only way to do that today and ensure cash flow is bushels. And so that's the key driver. But for you guys, how does your capital actually work? Is it still like debt? Is it still a different operating loan, or how do you guys specifically disrupt that component of this equation?
So that's a great question. So we work with these multinational food companies, and as you guys know, some know their farmers really well and others don't. And it doesn't really matter if they're a conventional company or organic company. There's that same issue across the board of, unfortunately, a lot of these multinational food companies know their processors like ADM and Cargill, but they don't know their growers. And so, in real time over the last year during the pandemic, we saw a lot of, hey, we need to get to know our farmers. And it's great to see that starting. It's insanely overdue. And I think the food companies are now recognizing that, until they knew their farmer, they had no idea how vulnerable their supply chain was. And I think, through COVID, we saw how vulnerable our supply chain is. And so as we work with those multinational companies, they have incredible insight into the loans that their farmers are currently in, the terms, the length, the type. And it's really working closely on a company by company, farmer by farmer basis, to figure out where is the pain point and where can we step in and meet those needs. One of my co-founders, Don Schaefer, was CEO of RS of Social Finance. And, they were an incredible organization that was able to meet the needs of emerging organizations that others, hadn't always serviced. And he felt that the chapter that he didn't get to do there was agriculture. And they deployed something like $200 million, in loans. And so he really is the expert on the loan side of the portfolio. He he can speak in detail to the way that we will be able to really kind of go in there on an individual basis, and not do this cookie cutter approach. And again, when you're talking to any other entrepreneur in any other industry, it gets back to the CEO thing. That's what we do. We don't try to shove it down their throat that it's like, hey, take it or leave it. This is what you got. It's what are the needs of your business model this year and how can we service the needs of that model? And now we have senior leadership at all of these multinational food companies that are really excited about the impact that they can make as they really transition their supply chains. The chief sustainability officer at General Mills has brought the CFO into her working group, which never would have happened 5 years ago.
Is this something where you work with farmers of every shape and size, or is there kind of a specific type of farm or size of farm or a specific farm that you look for to work with?
I think the main thing for us is meeting the farmer where they are. So we don't want to, we're not trying to convert anybody. We know that there are early adopters. We see that. And, we are contacted by farms of all sizes. And, in real time right now, we're trying to figure out what the product offering is to be able to meet
So
the needs.
how does the farmer work with rePlant today? Or is it the farmer that's going directly to rePlant today saying, hey, here's what I want to do. Can you guys help me out? Or how do you guys fill your funnel, I guess, on who you're actually going to work with in supply capital?
So the first fund is $250 million. It's the inaugural soil fund, and 80% of that is capital going to farmers, so 200 million. And then the other 20% is on the ag tech side of things. So, some of the technologies that farmers are seeing, some of the technologies that the food companies are seeing, for us to be able to sort of do some due diligence on that. And then to transition U.S. farmland would require $700 billion. And clearly a $250 million fund is just like a snowflake on that enormity of that issue. But for us to be able to model it and show that there are other ways that we can think about this, that are much more value aligned with the work that the farmers are doing, is what's so important. And what's been really interesting for us is to hear from sort of these more conventional institutions and banks who don't have that kind of knowledge in house. And you guys would know. I mean, there's so many people that just don't know what they don't know.
How's that work then? As you're navigating, okay, how do we work with this grower? Is it somebody from rePlant sitting down with every single one of the farmers and identifying, what are those capital needs and how are we going to fund this? Or how does that piece even scale? Or is it automated or digitized or what?
Yeah. So for us, leveraging the relationships with these multinational food companies for them to say, look, here are our top 10 growers who are already, moving towards regenerative organic agriculture. So we're not having to sell anybody on it. We're not convincing them on it. And here are their capital needs. And so then we can go into those top 10. It's just 10 farmers. I mean, that's not an enormous amount of due diligence, and really try to, figure out who wants to work with us, where those opportunities are. And the supply chains inside all of these companies, like they all have those lists. So finding the farmers is actually incredibly easy, because there's such a clear need in the farming community. And I think when you look at the cost savings that are generated as you transition to regenerative and get off of that chemical treadmill, that transition to regenerative is such a cost savings one. And then if a farmer wants to further transition on to organic, then they are also not only to achieve the cost savings, but then they're also able to accomplish the organic premium and capture that upside. But, I truly believe that a farmer witnessing another farmer make this transition and seeing the economic impact that happens as that farmer makes that transition, there's no amount of marketing or talking or anything else that speaks more than that.
I would agree with that completely. It's a lot more valuable to watch the neighbor go through something like you're talking about here with a transition like that and watch somebody next door have success with it that there's a value on that you can't get from anywhere else as a farmer, because it's the nature of the beast. It's what our occupation is. There's a lot of risk there year after year, and we only get that reward once per year. So being able to make sure that we can actually see somebody that we know and can talk to, who uses, maybe plants the same stuff we do in the same geography, the same soil, and see them have success with it. They're just, you can't place a value on that. Robyn, you mentioned that finding farmers is not very difficult for you guys. How do you decide who to fund with this? If you can find farmers easily, how do you go about deciding who you're involved with?
I think the due diligence is done by the companies themselves is a huge part of that. And then, on the farm, and, we're not naive. Like, they're going to be farmers that are going to want to work with us. And they're going to be farmers who are going to say, you know what, I've talked to the same guy. I could pick up my phone right now and call him. He's been my guy for 30 years. And they don't want to talk to us. And that's fine. We're not trying to sell someone that's unsellable. My response to that statement is usually, well, that's the guy that has been really happy keeping you in debt for 30 years. And we don't want to see that. We want to see a turn towards profitability. And again, I think for so many decades now, the focus has been on yield, and the messaging and marketing to the farming community has been yield. And farmers are waking up to the fact that they suffered profitability for yield. So what does it look like if a farmer's compass is pointed towards profitability?
But in this situation, then the farmer is saying, okay, I need to, transition my farm to organic or adopt regenerative systems, or, expand or get equipment or land or whatever. And then they're going to you guys. And then what's the payback, and then what's the commitment and stuff that the grower's doing? Because right now, interest rates at the bank are really low if they're going to go and buy farm ground or equipment or whatever. But how come they choose your capital, and what are those other requirements? Because I assume it's more than just, we need a percent interest, a certain percentage interest.
Yeah, so we bring in these technical assistance partners, and there's a company called Eco Practices, a great example. I know you guys know them, and it's really, figuring out. And again, it's not one size fits all. So I can't say, oh, it's this percent, because that's the conditioning that we're all used to. And that's what we're challenging, is that one size fits all approach. So it's farm by farm, the determination, and bringing in the technical assistance partner like Eco Practices that can say, okay, on this farm, the loan is going to be tied to soil organic matter and water infiltration, or, whatever it might be, and it's going to depend on the crop, and it's going to depend on the food company. We have some of the food companies, some of the partners pretty much are telling their farmers that they want them to work with rePlant because they're so tired of being told what to do by these extractive banks. And the banks demand quarterly earnings returns, and you can't give that as you're transitioning on a 3-year project. And so, we sat down and said, what does it look like to have a capital partner that can actually provide that transition financing? And that was the unique role that we can play as rePlant, is to come in as that transition finance partner and help them transition their supply chains.
But so, Robyn, why don't the companies finance it themselves and choose some of those growers, and the company work with them? Why not utilize some of their capital or their demand coming from the consumer, and then where does you guys' capital come from as a outside source?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the companies don't have that capital internally to finance the transition. The food industry, you guys know, the margins are just razor thin. And General Mills, for example, when they announced a couple of years ago that they wanted to convert 1 million acres to regenerative agriculture, they were hoping to get 25 farmers to sign up in the first 3 years, and they got 180 farmers signed up in the first 24 hours. And they will tell you that they thought they were going to be able to tap some of the money that they had in their foundation, but they quickly realized that it just wasn't enough. And I think there's a lot of humility in that, of saying this is actually more complicated than we thought. And, as a company, they knew ADM and Cargill, they didn't know their farmers. And so they really have done an amazing job of sort of leaning into that humility and saying, okay, where can we get to know our farmers and what are the needs? And then where do we find these capital partners that can help us transition?
So, but as you're looking at transitioning, like, how do you guys define a couple of these things? Like, how are you defining, yeah, I want to transition to regenerative. Yeah, I want to transition to organic, or I want to transition to sustainable. Like, how do you define some of those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, regenerative, I think, depending on who you ask, depending on the crop type, you're going to get different answer on what is regenerative. Soil health is a North Star for us. And so to think about regenerative practices towards better soil health, to be able to have higher nutrient density, water infiltration, water conservation, those metrics. And so, for us, it's really sitting down with those growers and saying, Zach, as we write the terms of this loan, do you want, is it water conservation? Is it soil nutrient density? What is it? What are these metrics that we want to capture on your farm that you can work towards and deliver towards? And then we bring in that third party verifier because it holds everybody accountable. And some people were like, well, why don't you, have that third party verification in house as part of rePlant? We felt that was a conflict of interest. And it's like, we want that third party verification to hold us accountable, and we want the verifier to hold the farmer accountable.
Do you find competition in certain things, jumping back to, deciding what is regenerative or what is organic, and how do you come up with the labels for these things? Do you find competition when it comes to, if somebody wants to be regenerative or if they want to be organic, and how can they try to achieve both? Because it's not always easy to do that. So how do you work with the guys to try to decide what is it that they want to be and how do they get there?
I mean, I think it's a very personal decision, and we're not going to tell anyone what to do. I mean, it's such an intimate decision for a farm family. And, I'm from Texas, and we've had farmers in Texas say, if I start talking about organic, my kid's not going to make the football team, and it's like, no one wants to do that to a family. So to really listen to what the needs are and what they want to accomplish, what we have seen is that if a farmer transitions to regenerative, the cost savings are measurable in that first year. And sometimes it's fine just to stay there and sit there, employing these practices that we've talked about. And then in some cases, after a few years of farming regeneratively, they're like, okay, I'm ready to make the next step to organic and capture that premium. There's legislation that's pending in New Zealand, and it's one of 2 developed countries that doesn't actually have organic legislation. And my recommendation to them was, make sure you incorporate regenerative in that definition so that you don't end up, with this tension, which is where we are now today, where, the consumer thinks organic incorporates these values around soil health. And that actually isn't part of the legal definition of organic. So for us, it's really, that North Star is soil health and water conservation, water infiltration, and nutrient density.
Well, Zach, what do you think? This has been a heck of a conversation, and Robyn, I commend you guys for the stuff that the work that rePlant is doing. I think there's a really specific spot there and a role that you guys are filling that is really needed, and but just good, I think, for farmers to realize there's lots of new creative things that are coming about. And Zach, I mean, a lot of our listeners might have more options than what they really thought.
Yep, that's really interesting to hear from you, Robyn. I mean, thank you for joining us today for this. You can hear the passion in your voice when you talk about what it is you're doing. It's very commendable. So just thank you for joining us for the conversation. It was really great.
Okay, great. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks,
Robyn.
Bye.
Now, it sounds like it's time for a listener voicemail, Zach. Let's see what we got here today.
Hey, Zach and Mitchell. My name's Justin. I'm a small farmer from Middle Tennessee. I want to say love y'all's guys' shows and YouTube channels. I just want to say I'm very encouraged as a young farmer. Your shows are very encouraging to me because I'm trying to figure out, where is my spot in the world of agriculture, and y'all are very inspiring between y'all and the guests that you have on. They're very inspiring to me, but in the midst of this pandemic mess that we're in, we've seen the weaknesses that are in our food supply chains, whether it be in meats or whether it be in crops, and the issues that we see getting it from the farm to the table. And we understand that it takes a lot between the farm and the table. And so I'm very excited. I'm very encouraged by this because I see a spot for the small producer. A lot of the guys that are around here, including us, are guys that have, a couple acres of row crops, anywhere from 5 to 50 or 100 head of cattle. And I see a spot for those producers to be able to go more quickly to the table as far as that shortening up that supply chain, because now the consumer has seen, issues that they have getting their food, and I believe that they have a keen interest in seeing where it comes from, and now they see a need to be more direct because maybe they don't trust that food system as much. So as a small producer, I'm very encouraged through all of this, even though it's not much to be excited about, or it's a lot that could be worried about. But I just wanted y'all's thoughts on, the whole meat packing, industry, and how it's very hands-on and subject to human labor and sickness, definitely. What do y'all think? Do y'all think that's something that is long-term as far as people going straight from farm to table through a small meat packing facility, or do you think this will kind of settle down with how this virus settles out? Thank y'all. Huge fan of your show. Take care.
I would agree. Since this whole thing started happening and the supplies were tightening up with the packing plants in, what was that, April, May, I think I said it at the time, there's going to be opportunities for people to get creative here. And we actually had somebody on our other podcast we do here that is actually in the process of building his own facility to do his own butchering. And I think we'll certainly gravitate back as the virus sort of slows down. We're going to gravitate back to the system that we have because it's a good system. But I think there will be a lot of people who take advantage of the weak spots that we saw there. And probably it'll play into their favor in a way where they can go more direct to consumer, because I think it did wake a lot of people up to, honestly, the weaknesses of that chain that works really well, when it's working well. But you throw a wrench in there and things fell apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, Zach, I totally agree. And Justin, thanks for calling in on this. I definitely think this is going to be an ongoing issue for a while. My hot take on it, is I totally agree with Zach that there's a ton of opportunity to be able to better connect with that consumer. But there's a lot of red tape around this. I think there's a lot of policy that needs to be reevaluated here in order to allow for more of those kind of local processing facilities like Zach's buddy is getting going. Got to be able to have the ability to actually get that meat harvested and actually get it to the consumer. And there's a lot of regulation around what you can and can't do as far as selling directly to those consumers. Like, I can't just go and get a hog processed and sell only the pork chops. I have to sell that hog to a family by the quarter, half, or whole hog, and they are technically the one getting it processed. The issue in my area, I just heard here the other day that our local processing facilities are booked 18 to 24 months out. So I can't even go and purchase a hog from a local producer right now and go get it processed, because they are booked to the max because of so many of these people that are attempting to take advantage of being able to better connect with the consumer and go directly from that farmer to that family, because we can all become money ahead in doing so. But the processing and the policy side of things is definitely something that needs to be further addressed.
That's it for Fieldwork today. Our show is produced by Annie Baxter with lots of great help from Lori Stern, Amy Mayer, Mike Langseth, and Corey Suzuki.
Christian Schmidt runs our social media, Ellie Lyons does our marketing, and Lauren Humpert is our project coordinator.
Be sure to check us out on social media. We are at Fieldwork Talk on all the usual channels, and we'd love it if you wrote us a review to help other people find us.
Yeah, and don't forget that we love hearing from you, so definitely give us a call with your comments or questions. Call us up, leave us a voicemail, 651-228-4810. That's 651-228-4810.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time, and until then, don't soil yourself.